Hello, everyone. Welcome. I am Karen Officer, Director of the Undergraduate Filmmaking Program at Stony Brook. This is our Create Wednesday program, which is our ongoing series of events offering opportunities to hear from and have discussions with award-winning filmmakers and writers. This is our third of several virtual events we've been having this semester. We hope you continue to join us as we showcase incredible talent throughout the remainder of the semester. You can follow us on Instagram at Wolfie Filmmakers. Today, we are in conversation with Perry Blackshear. Perry is a filmmaker from North Carolina. He earned his MFA in directing from NYU Grad Film School, where he was a Dean's Fellow. His thesis film, a feature entitled They Look Like People, which is amazing, by the way, I throw that in there, it's not in the bio. They Look Like People became an International Film Festival darling and won dozens of awards, including the Grand Jury Award at Slamdance, IFF Boston, and Nashville. It went on to play theatrically before landing at Netflix. His second feature film, The Siren, was acquired by Dark Sky, and his third, Ogre, is in post-production. Perry recently sold an original TV show to Netflix. He just completed a writing project for Amazon and is in development with another show at Amazon. So please join me in welcoming Perry Blackshear. Lots of applause all over.
Hello, everyone. Well, this is great. It's great to see some students here. It's fun because I teach some students directing at the graduate school, and I see one former student here, so this is great. Some of this may be, you may have heard this before, but it is fun since I mostly teach directing to get to talk about writing. So I'll be doing that a little bit today, and I'm super young in that picture, by the way, that was sent out for the thing. I gave them two, and that one is from like 6 years ago when I was still unblemished by the industry. So that was sort of difficult to see. It's really nice to see you here today. Like I said, I teach directing in the graduate school and writing in the undergraduate. And this spring I'll be teaching directing as well and filmmaking in the undergraduate. So when I was asked to host this, I thought a lot about myself as an undergrad and the kind of thing that I would want to hear from someone that's, because my experience as an undergrad is often the speakers came in, and even in grad school, and the speakers would come in and say something like this. So I was at Princeton, and then my friend at SNL was like, do you want to write for SNL? And I was like, no. And then later I was like, yeah. And that's how I started my career. And then next year, Woody Allen asked me to write a film, and I was like, okay. And it's like sometimes the people you get are so wildly successful that it feels sort of like out of touch with some kind of reality. And I am not like that. I was an undergrad. I was a film undergrad. I went to grad school. I spent many years in the wilderness along with a lot of my colleagues. So this hour is geared towards basically the stuff that I would have wanted to hear, mostly, as an undergrad, even though that's like a million years ago, so things have changed. And also informed by a lot of questions I get from grad students and undergrads over the years. So hopefully this can be useful to those of you that are interested in writing for TV and film. So first I'm going to give a little bit more context to sort of my experience and to go through grad school and a little bit after, and through the sort of dark ages with my colleagues into the first feature film, and then sort of transitioning from feature film to TV writing. And I'm going to do this because I think a lot of people give a lot of writing advice, and I want to provide a little bit of context to my experience, because I think one thing that creative writing majors run into is creative writing is very similar to screenwriting. It's also quite different, and the differences can, especially when you're skilled and experienced with creative writing, it can trip you up a little bit. So one thing I sometimes tell students is that in screenwriting, words don't matter that much, and that is usually deeply offensive to creative writing majors. So we'll talk a little bit about that. So that's, I come to writing as a filmmaker and as a director and as a sort of storyteller first. So that's, I want to give a little bit of context. I'll talk to you about some some of the things about writing that I wish I had known a decade ago, or even 5 years ago, and in some cases even a few years ago, just to hopefully save you from some of the mistakes my colleagues and I made. And then at the end, I'll talk a little bit more broadly about again, the advice that I wish I had had when I was a college student about the creative life and creative work, and a tiny bit about balancing creative work with reality, because I think that's a question a lot of young people have. And at the end, I'll give a few resources, books, websites, and things that I've really enjoyed over the years that if you're interested, you can take a look at and do a deep dive in some of those, some of the kind of cultural commentators I really enjoy. And then we'll ask some questions. And if no one has questions, I just had a lab where I asked students for some of their toughest questions, and some of them are like, what separates a good film student from a failure film student from a successful film student, and stuff like that. So if I need to, I can get into those at the end if there's no questions, because I think they were, some of them were really good questions. So the first section is just giving you all a little bit more context. So thank you for that bio, by the way, Karen. It's always slightly embarrassing to hear that. But I made film since I was very little. I went to NYU graduate school, and I got spat out during the recession. All of us thought we were going to suddenly become filmmakers, and all of us were not. That did not happen. I worked for several years as a crew member, an editor, a gaffer, and a cinematographer. And I also, in the meantime, was reading about 2 scripts a day, sort of frantically on the side, and writing screenplays that were not good. After I got a full-time job in a tech company, and then I started writing and preparing to shoot this feature film that I ended up making for about $5,000 with colleagues of mine. I had crewed so much and shot so much for cheap, and the whole time I was like, there's got to be a better way. And then finally I suffered through this very low budget production. Writing wise, one piece of advice I'll give you is to learn about yourself and what works and doesn't work for you in terms of getting writing done, because so much I would say, I don't know if I can put a number on it, but most of the trouble writers have is just not finishing. And what I did was I actually invited 2 great friends of mine over to New York, and we were going to shoot this movie for a month. And I did that before I even had an idea of a movie. And that pitted my procrastination against my deep personal shame with my good friends. And the shame won the war, and I ended up writing the script in about 3 weeks with them. And you get it done when you do stuff like that. So we didn't know what was going to happen with the movie. We made it for nothing. I edited it for 2 years. It got into a good festival, and then sort of went on, ended up going to Netflix, and then slowly, everybody thinks that when they get into the good movie or the good festival, then they're kind of done. But it took a long time, wrote a lot more scripts with a lot of my friends. And I'm going to bring up some of my colleagues, because I think another one of the big pieces of advice that I'll talk about a little bit later too is how important your people are, the people you are in creative collaboration with, the people that you send notes to, that you get notes from, the people that you submit to the Sundance Lab to, the people that read your drafts, that read draft 1 and also draft 10. Because I think for those of you that listen to podcasts and read sort of hagiographies of famous authors and creatives, they tend to discount all the brilliant creative people around that person that helped get them to where they were. So in my year at NYU, there was many of us that all sort of went on to do larger things, and it was, I think, in part because none of these people were able to succeed without without all of us. So Anya Marquardt won Berlin and is now directing TV. Joe Vladica won Tribeca and is now directing Narcos and The Terror. Chloe Zhao is the most famous one. She was my classmate. She went to Sundance and Cannes, won Cannes. I think this year won every festival known to man with Nomadland, including Venice, and is now directing The Eternals. Shaka King was in Sundance and is now directing Judas and the Black Messiah. There's a bunch more here, but the reason that I mention it is all of the writing advice I'm going to give you stems from this period where we were all working together, trying to figure out how to write, reading each other's drafts, watching each other's features, and developing a way of writing that stole a little bit from the kind of classic Hollywood style that some of you may know about, like Story by McKee and Save the Cat and all these sort of structuralists, while making sure that we weren't sacrificing the integrity of the stuff we cared about. So this is the sort of soup where all these ideas and concepts sort of come from. And one of the joys of going through what we did is realizing the people that make it, how long like they are sort of in the trenches working. And that one of the joys of talking to students and talking to you all is being able to translate all the mistakes that we made into useful things for you guys. That's one of the things I love about teaching, is taking the stuff that goes on every day and bringing it into the classroom and talking about all the ways that I messed up and all the ways all of us messed up, and hoping that can be useful to you all. Because one of the things that made me the saddest about this time after school is that the people that I thought were actually some of the most creative and had the most to say got dissuaded because of, I think partly because of the way school worked. And so one of the things that I will talk to you all about today is how I believe that everyone should be able to make a movie and get their story told, because we need you all. We need young voices. We need new people, because you all will change culture. And I think that culture is ready for some change. One of my agents used to work in a nonprofit sector, and after he saw Get Out, he quit and was like, this is how to change things. This is how to make a difference. It's through culture, it's through stories. So again, this is one of the joys of being a professor and the joys of talking about all this stuff. Okay, so first thing we'll do, and we're only going to do one of these, I think, is a little exercise. It requires very little participation, only some thinking. And it's, you know, when you talk to creative professionals, something that comes up a lot is, and this really confused me when I was an undergrad, is everybody's like, what we're really looking for is someone with a vision, or like, what we're really looking for is someone with a voice, And I was like, what does that that mean? And then people would ask me, what's your voice? And I was like, I don't know what that means, and I don't know what my voice is. So this is a little exercise to get you to think about that a little bit. So it'll only take a few minutes, but for those of you that are here, and I invite other professors to join along if they'd like, and even some of my former students who I think have done this before, is to, first thing, and we'll only do this for a few minutes, is to come up with for those of you that just want to, I guess I'll say a movie idea. Come up with a feature film idea, any feature film idea, but the only rule is you can't steal something that you've come up with before. You just have to come up with a new one right now. If you're given $100 million, someone says, you have $100 million, make a movie this spring. Come up with any idea for a movie, and I'll give you a few minutes to do that on your own while I meditate. Okay, so now you have your movie idea. It could be, in the past, people have had stuff that have to do with holograms. It might be something to do with the pandemic, possibly. But the reason I ask you to do that is because it's not a terrible, it may point out a little bit where your brain goes when it has to come up with an idea. What's the first thing it goes to? Did you think like, oh my God, I just watched Ozark and I didn't love it, but like it had this cool thing and I'm gonna steal that? Or did it go to, you know, some story your grandmother told you? Or did it go to a fairy tale? Or did it go to whatever you were staring at? But this is sort of like, if you try doing this, it begins to approach what may be your sort of automatic instinct, first instinct in thinking of a story idea, which can be good and can be, often can be, you know, what sometimes we call the first choice. So it's sort of like this instinct, and it comes from watching millions of movies over your life, you know, and sort of using all the movie ideas in your head to kind of spit out a new remix of all these other movie ideas. Okay, so now you have that. And usually when I do this in class, I do, there's 3 sort of extra exercises we'll do, but we'll only do 1 more this time. So now think about, and some of my students are gonna be familiar with this. If you were to either die or no longer be able to be creative ever in your life for some sort of magical decree, but someone said, okay, in a year, you have $200 million or $100 million or whatever, and you can make 1 more movie that will be the last creative endeavor you ever do. I like to think about it as if I would vanish, you know, die. But if that's too intense for you, you know, you personally, I understand that you can think about it being your final opportunity to give voice to what you care about and what you don't care about. So you're given $100 million to make a movie. You can hire writers, you can hire the best cinematographers and editors and famous actors and anybody you want. And once it's done and made, that's it. This is your sort of the final thing that you get to say about the world and what you think matters and what doesn't matter. Oh, excuse me. So now take a few minutes. I'll give you 3 minutes. And what you should do here is not think about the plot. Don't think about like, oh, it's a guy with a sword that has to go, you know, or, you know, just think about the stuff, the elements of this movie. What kind of protagonist would it have? What kind of things would it involve? What kind of themes would it involve? Would it be about redemption? Would it be about society? Would it be about space because you think space is awesome? Think about what it would include and what it might not include, but especially the things you'd want to be in there. I can tell you mine after this. So spend, if anyone, does anyone have any questions on this? Because sometimes people are confused, and then we can give you a few minutes. Okay, great. I see a bunch of little names that I assume are connected to human beings, but we'll give you 3 minutes, and you can just write a list of the stuff that you like would really want to get into your sort of final creative vision. That was 3 minutes. Hopefully you all had some interesting elements on there. And usually what happens in class, and what happened when I did this for myself, and what happens continuously whenever I'm pitching a new TV show idea or feature idea to my agents or executives, is that there is a delta between the first type of idea and the tombstone idea. And usually it has to do with thinking about your ideas in this way, especially if you're doing something long form, which will be many, many, many years in your life, gets you to focus a little bit on the stuff that you really, really care about, and not the stuff that you just think is nifty or cool or that you saw last week. The 2 other versions of this, for those of you that are interested, that I and my colleagues apply to our own work when we're coming up with ideas, is the desert island idea, which is thinking about all the attributes of a media that if you were stuck on a desert island forever, you'd want to be in there. The last one that in some ways is the most potent is an exercise where you think if you loved someone that you cared the most about and you couldn't be with them as they were dying, but you could, in this magical world, create a movie that they could watch, what elements would that movie include? And the nice thing about that one is it sort of removes your own ego from the equation, because a lot of times the tombstone idea, some people can be like, I just wish people knew this about the world, which they don't. But the love letter idea will get you to really focus and hone in on what stuff is the most me, like the stuff that is the deepest, that I care about the most. Like I said, I still do it and I still come up with ideas, do this test on it, and I'm like, nope, that would have been a lot of sometimes you come up with ideas and you think they're very clever, and there's a lot of reasons to come up with movies. You want to impress your parents, you want to rebel, you like people telling you you're a genius. There's all these reasons, and especially if you have some sort of success as a creative, sometimes everyone's like, oh, do it like that one. Remember that one that was really funny? And then you're like, okay, and you start to like follow into these tracks that you accidentally get placed in. So this I think begins to get you to think about what your voice is and what it could be and what matters to you the most. And the thing that has been a great piece of learning for me as I got deeper into the industry is whatever you wrote down that is in your tombstone idea is actually the thing that eventually people will need you for the most. That this vision and voice, which is really sort of a aggregate of what, like, your vision of what matters and what doesn't matter in the world and how you see it, and your thoughts on, what is life, what is death, what happens afterwards, how do you treat people. There's what will happen eventually is that you will have tons and tons of people that are tremendously good at all sorts of different types of craft. But your voice will be the thing that they need the most and matters the most. And you can learn craft. It's like learning how to play basketball. But honing your voice and your vision is the thing that will really long-term be the thing that matters the most. Otherwise, it will be sort of like you will forever be playing in a really good cover band of someone else's songs and someone else's voice and someone else's vision. So, as you go through your creative writing life, I encourage you to keep thinking about this. And it's okay not to know yet. That's what college is all about. That's what your 20s is all about. And that's what, I'm still trying to figure it out sometimes. I think when you hit the industry, people will start trying to get you to change all sorts of things. And the more you know about what you care about and what you don't, you know what to fight for and what you don't need to fight for. So this is sort of a something that you can keep honing forever. Okay, so this is the first piece of advice I wanted to give you, is that, like, is your vision and your voice, that's unique to you, is the most important thing, your most important, most valuable asset ultimately. Okay, another thing that I wish I had known before is that, especially if you're writing a long form story, is try pitching it to friends and colleagues and family members for a while first. And coming up with the kind of big picture early on. And the word pitching, I used to hate and find really gross. It felt like, I don't know, what people on Shark Tank do and people that are trying to, like, sell you used cars do. And it felt extremely antithetical to anything creative or that had integrity or anything. But I've grown over the years to really love it for a few different reasons. One of them is that most film students and writing students, and at least I can speak for myself and my colleagues, early on are very good at some of the specifics of writing. They're very good at dialogue. They can write super great dialogue, quotable dialogue, and really good with scenes. And also often very good with fun characters and sort of major ideas. But they often are writing struggling against a headwind because they haven't figured out some of the really big sort of story gears of their script or their movie or their idea. So I'll give you a goofy example. The difference between two brothers go to a house that is, and there's a ghost in it. And you're like, okay, and you write a whole script and you spend 3 years working on that. And it's fine, it's like a pretty good script because you've honed it so much and written all the dialogue and all the stuff. But if you are telling this to people and people are like, okay, and you keep talking and you get ideas from people. And one day as you're pitching it, someone says like, is it a love story? And then you suddenly find yourself saying, okay, it's two brothers that go to a house and they both fall in love with the same ghost. And you're like, aha, okay. And that's a ridiculous idea, but you can see how every scene writes itself now because you have these big pieces of conflict that are now in wonderful, perpendicular to each other. And now you have some of these big sort of silly gears at your back, and you can the writing process doesn't have to be a struggle through mud to get every scene good. It can be an enjoyable decision-making process of which cool path you want to go down. And so doing as much work up front with your idea and pitching it over and over again and really honing the idea. Some people talk about log lines, some people talk about one-pagers. I found really exhilarating and really freeing and really fun. And extremely useful in the long term. One little note, because I could have a whole thing about pitching. Usually, and I don't know if this happens to you all, but when I was in undergrad and even in grad school, when I was pitching something, it would usually go something like this. Okay, so what's your movie about? And immediately my body would tighten and my sort of chin would lower a little bit. And I'd say something like, it's like, I don't know, it's like, I'm still thinking about it, but it's about a guy. And then he's really going after this. Hold on, it's okay, so it's about a guy and he's going after this thing, but then this other thing happened, but it feels like you're trying to defend your existence and like your goodness as a creative person rather than enjoying getting to talk about something you love. And so I want to encourage you to one of the biggest pieces of advice that I got that has helped me so much is if someone asks you like, oh, so I heard you went, up to some cabin in the woods this weekend. I've been thinking about going to a cabin. What's it like? Instead of like this, you're like, oh my God, it was so great. Like there was woods, there was a hot tub. We got to chill there. You should totally go. It's called this. This part wasn't that great. And we're still figuring that out, but it's so cool. And your whole, like the way you're speaking about it is like, you get this opportunity to tell someone you enjoy talking to about something you love and care about. And then if they're like, that sounds exactly the opposite of what I like, then you can say, okay, that's fine. It's not anyone's problem. Like this was something that I loved and I'm telling you about it. And you're like, that sucks. And you can be like, chill, no problem. I don't hate you. I don't feel like I'm a terrible creative person anymore. It doesn't match, and that's okay for everybody. So just reframing how you talk about your ideas made a big difference to me, because it was 8 years of that, like, oh God, I need to defend like why I'm, my genius or something, or like at least my non-genius. Anyway, I don't know, this may not happen to you all, but it happened to many of my colleagues, so I'm just bringing it up. One more nuts and bolts thing about pitching, because I went through this real year of turmoil when this TV show I pitched got picked up by a producer that I had a relationship with, and then they worked on the pitch with me for a year. And so I pitched to them about 30 times in different ways. And eventually it led to a pitch at Netflix, which was pretty nerve-wracking because I've never made a TV show before. I only had some small features, and it was, I had to go straight for 30 minutes and answer some pretty tough questions. So it was a real trial by fire, and I think I learned a lot about that. And in addition to the framing, the other few pieces of advice on pitching to anyone is make it personal. If you start your pitch saying like, someone that I really loved, went through, went through this trauma, and I was with them the whole time, and this story is about what that was like for both of us and trying to make sense of it. Everyone, you can hear a pin drop, as opposed to starting in any other way, like it's this cool thing. And the other three things I would say is to make sure you get in there why it matters to you specifically. So this can be connected to the personal thing, because if it doesn't really matter to you, you should pick some other idea. Not because otherwise it's just an idea that you think that they'll like or buy or whatever, which is not, everyone can tell if you're doing that, by the way. Why it matters now. A lot of producers will ask why now. And it doesn't have to be like, it's about coronavirus and how much I hate it. Because certainly there's a lot of that going around. But I think that there's this business school trick, which is what's missing in the world in your life, make it. That applies to this, where like, what haven't you seen that you think needs to exist at this moment that people really need to see? So my friend Joey, who some of you may meet in the lab this Friday, has a show that he just sold to Sony that it's about gay culture in New York. And he says, I want to make a sort of show that's all about, three different gay couples. And it's about sort of post coming out stories, where like, now we're part of society. So now I want to talk about marriage. I want to talk about open relationships. I want to talk about adoption or surrogate parenthood. Like what are the trials after, and that's what my friends and I are going through, and this show doesn't exist. And that was sort of his end to the show. And also just why you think it's awesome. People can tell when you're really, really excited about something. When Chloe pitched the Eternals, which is this Marvel thing, she talked a lot about manga, even though she came from independent film, because she grew up with manga and how much she loved it, and the power of it, and the sort of unique sort of cross-cultural influence of it, and how much she loved it. And that, I think, was a huge part of her pitch. Another piece of advice is that movies are often, and my old mentor used to say movies are stupid, but that feels rude. So I'm going to say movies are often much sillier than you think. When you listen to podcasts or read bios of filmmakers, and I know this because some of my friends are now being interviewed, you are taught by agents or just marketing instinct to talk a certain way about your own artistry. And a lot of it comes down to like, oh, I had this idea, and then I like drank a bottle of schnapps and wrote for 6 days straight, and like now it's genius. Whereas actually the script had gone through 12 revisions with a huge set of brilliant creative executives, and there was a tremendous struggle about it, and like, you hated yourself for 3 weeks. Like there's a certain kind of gated community that happens around filmmaking, where the world is divided into creative geniuses and you all, and you think that your job is to worship, emulate, go through the creative genius path, whereas actually, Tarantino made a film that was so bad no one has ever seen it before he made his first film. So did Lena Dunham. The Cannes winner a few years ago was so bad on its first edit that Sundance rejected it, even though Sundance sponsored it. And it took 2 more years of editing before it got it to, and then it won. Like this is much messier and much more process oriented rather than outcome oriented than I think a lot of the literature on it. And one of my favorite pieces of writing of all time, Lord of the Rings, is basically just a MacGuffin, which is a thing that everyone wants, and a group of people that are trying to bring a thing to a place by a certain time. Most of Hitchcock is the same. He just makes it the plans or the diamond or the gunpowder or whatever that everybody wants. It's kind of silly. Like, it's kind of just a little bit doofy, and then you base a lot of your brilliant craft around that. But I guess the point there is to not be intimidated, and that if people tell you, or you get this feeling that, oh, I'm not a creative person, like I can't do what creative people do. Creativity is not an immutable quality like shoe size or height. It's like being good at basketball. It's something that some people growing up were encouraged to be creative and got to do it for a little bit longer. But one of the things that I'm both very inspired by and drives me insane about writing and teaching writing in undergrad is some of the best scripts are written by med students and people that have spent their whole life devoted to some other craft, but have this desire inside them to do the creative arts and learn very quickly and care about it so much and go from 1 to 10 over the course of about 3 months, because they are being encouraged sometimes for the first time in their life to do something creative. So that was the point I want to make there. It drives me crazy. I don't know what to do. I don't know whether to say stop being pre-med and become a screenwriter, or to let them be a doctor, which is also great. Another thing that to take into your poor creative writing teachers is that learning to take criticism and to give and receive feedback is often breezed over as something that you're like automatically you should know how to do, or is something that you're like, oh, you're too sensitive, or it's like a personality flaw of yours or whatever. But it's actually also a skill that you learn over time. We had one student at NYU grad that every time people gave her criticism, she just erased everything she did and what everyone else said. And you have other people that get up there and all the faculty and all their friends and all the colleagues are telling them one thing, and they say, I'm living my truth, no. And they may be right. I haven't seen a situation where that has been right yet. But it's also true that, you being able to balance listening to your own inner creative voice and facing what happens when your creative inner voice hits reality, and the separation, the distance sometimes between those two things, is a skill set that you will be honing for the rest of your creative career, and something to invest in. In other words, if you're in class and you thought your story was terrible and everyone loved it, instead of being like, oh, I knew I was a genius, you can be like, what's happening? What am I missing here? Let me learn from this. I'm not, you know what I mean? Or the other way around is you're like, I love this so much and everyone hates it. Learn from this as well. Like try to figure out the delta there. Sometimes it's just that people don't understand what you're trying to do. Sometimes it's the wrong audience. And sometimes you just may be blind to something that, based off your life circumstance, you haven't learned or figured out yet. That has happened to me several times. Let's see. I want to give a little time for questions at the end, but I'll do a few more of these. I think, especially for those of you that are ambitious, you listen to the podcast, you watch the YouTube videos, you hear the stories, you become very goal oriented, where you're like, I'm going to write the best short story of all time or best movie of all time, get into Sundance, or like get into some, write a novel. It'll be brilliant, like my hero XYZ, and then I'll have made it. But what I want to encourage you to think about instead is to get better at the process. And one way of thinking about this that I've enjoyed, that I've discovered recently, is when Spike Lee was advisor at NYU grad, and you go and you pitch him ideas. And I don't think he really knew what to do with me, because my first idea was a musical and my second one was a thriller. He likes musicals a lot, by the way, which I didn't know. But I brought him this like not very good idea about young kids, and like they like went into a video game and lived into a video game, and it was not that good. But what he did was he was like, oh my God, this is so great. It's about like hating your reality and like wanting to live in another reality. So what you got to do is you have a bunch of these kids that like come from broken homes, and they're all in this halfway house, and they all find this thing together. And he started like spinning in front of my eyes about 6 different better movie ideas based off some of the material that I brought him. And what I realized is that the goal as you work on your creative craft is to become not good at making one good short or honing perfectly one. And I think some people disagree with this. Some people are forever after the perfect sentence, and that's okay. But it's to think about, the way they describe it is you go into a pantry, and for people that have only started cooking, you see a bunch of food and you're like, okay, this is this food, this is this food, what do I do with this? But people that have been cooking for a long time and practicing forever, as they go into the same pantry and all they see are recipes, they jump out at you and you're like, oh, I can do this, I can do this. And it doesn't matter what elements you end up getting, you can synthesize them into something that you care about very quickly. And then if your producer comes to you and says, this is all wrong, we need to make it YA and change all the main characters, you're like, okay, because all of a sudden you can synthesize something new from that. And that, if you can do that, you will be in great shape, because you won't be hooked into one, you won't be tied to one specific story or something, because well, this is something I'll get into a little bit later. Well, hopefully. I touched about this on a little bit of this. I guess I talked about that a little bit. The last thing I'll say about writing is how much I have students draw a graph of what they like. If this is the time in a movie, and this is, let's see, this is backwards. This is the ending, and this is the beginning. Elena's shaking her head. This is already confusing. The part of the movie that matters the most is this part, and everything else is just build up to the ending. Your movie is your last 10 minutes. Everything else is sort of preparing and stacking and making, setting everything up for this final thematic, emotional, character-driven confrontation between where your character, your plot, and your themes all unify into a final decision and realization. And that's something that made a huge difference in how I wrote movies, because usually what happens when you're starting writing is you write the first act, and this happened to 80% of my NYU graduate colleagues. You write the first act, you get to about page 35 or 40, you struggle through 45 to 50, and then you give it up. Because you think the important part of your movie is the trailer stuff, which is in the first act, but that's actually the least important stuff. And it's much better to think about your ending and be able to rearrange your first act or the first quarter of your movie forever. Last thing I'll say is there's a whole bunch of wonderful literature out there, like Story, Stephen King, Joseph Campbell, Save the Cat, a lot of literature about screenwriting and about act structure. And I like some of it, I don't like some of it, but what I would encourage you not to do, which I did, is to think that will solve not having a good idea. You jump into that as first, where it's actually sort of the third thing you need to think about after, why am I doing this? Why do I care about it? And what's this really about underneath? Then you can start thinking about structure and stuff like that. But I think I thought that if I just followed the rules, the movie would be good. And that's not, in my experience, not true. I guess I've already touched on that. The last part of this is just some thoughts on the creative life and like how to make this, process oriented rather than just, goal oriented. I lucked into this part, but finding your people is so elemental to having a creative life, because it's hard, first of all. And second of all, the more creative people you know, the more creative knowledge and abilities you get so much more, like you get all the intelligence and creative force of all of your colleagues combined, and it sort of allows you to grow exponentially as a writer and as a storyteller, because everybody will miss something except one of your friends, and everybody will be like, oh my god, and then the same thing will happen over and over again. And having like a group that you go to, or even just a few people, we all would stay up late in the edit lab or like on the phone talking through our ideas and reading each other's drafts over and over and over again. You learn so much from other people's writing that, as it reflects on your own, and also psychologically, it makes an enormous difference, because, writing, you go into some pretty deep, intense places, and it's great having support, creative support, psychological support, and an excuse to have a community, which is, I think, actually secretly why a lot of artists stay artists, is because of the artistic community that they've found, which in some ways can be more important than the art itself, especially, during tough times, or when you haven't, when you're, anyway, great stuff. You are you, not your work. This is real tough, but what happens is that you spend your whole summer writing a story and everybody hates it and you think you're terrible, and then you spend your whole year making a movie and it gets into a million festivals and then you think you're a genius, and then your movie gets torn apart and your manager dumps you and you think you're a failure. And it's like this constant ricocheting between feeling like a genius and a failure. And maybe I'm only speaking for myself here, but I think it's very easy to get caught up in some of the reactions, the world reactions to your work, both for positive and negative. And it's a lifelong process to attempt to enjoy the good times and be okay through the bad times, and realize that, just speaking from personal experience, the two of the people that are the most successful from my year had two of the worst second year films at school. In fact, their capstone project they spent 20 grand on in credit card debt were the worst ones. And they, learned from it eventually. So don't be too hard on yourself for your failures. You have tons of ideas in you, tons of shorts in you. And also don't, like, some people that I know got into the Sundance Lab and started thinking that their old friends weren't their friends anymore because now they were in the Sundance Lab. Some of you will have a lot of success at some point. Don't let that happen to you either. I mean, you can if you want to, but you may be miserable at some point. And the last thing, and I'll say this because people enjoyed it in the lab, is the eternal struggle of being a creative is this thing that happens where you fall deep, you to make it something that you want to work on, you fall deeply in love with your work. You think about it all the time. It's like being in a relationship. You fall so hard for this idea. You think it'll save you. You want to, have this is your forever idea that you'll pursue to the ends of the earth. And then you present it to whatever people you present it to, your agents or reality, and they say no because, someone else made that movie 5 minutes ago. And you'll be like, and then you have to let it go without bitterness and without being like, no one understands my idea. Because what can happen is either you start thinking like, well, if they don't like my passionate ideas, I'll just start playing the game and come up with something cool that will sell. Or you just feel miserable and think, I'll never fall in love again with any other idea. So much like, in love relationships, you have to fall in love be passionate about your ideas while also being eventually able to let them go if it just doesn't work out. So that's the final sort of thing I would say about the creative life that I've learned. There are 6, let's see, I can do this in the chat here. 6 things, sort of continued reading that you all can look at if you'd like, that have made a big difference over the years, because this is all stuff you learn from sort of through exploring yourself. The first one is Letterboxd, which is a really fun review site where there are some hilarious and also brilliant, like PhD level write-ups on modern cinema in terms of like really potent, critical, interesting critical voices. I love this site and I've learned so much from people's reactions to big pieces of culture. And I like this Demi's stuff. I love a lot. I think it's really funny and also very wise culturally. TV Tropes is a hilarious site that I encourage you to all get lost on. Elaine is nodding. I spent you just get lost on it, but it's all a sort of amalgamation of tropes, good and bad, useful and not useful, like things like Chekhov's gun, the Manic Pixie Dream Girl, and sort of a deconstruction of all of these cultural pieces that I found wonderfully fun and actually rather empowering rather than critical. Film Crit Hulk, no one knows who this person is and if it's a guy or a girl. Some people think it's Soderbergh. That's just sort of a myth. Wonderful long-form critical commentary on modern culture. Walter Chaw from Film Freak Central is also a wonderful critical voice. I'm terrified of him. I actually pulled my movie from being reviewed by him because he's so critical, but I think he's also wonderful, especially about big picture pieces of modern culture, like Marvel or Mulan or anything like this. And the last one is Lindsay Ellis, who is does these video essays. She has this wonderful series on why Lord of the Rings is so good and why The Hobbit is so bad. And she has a great one that applies auteur theory to the Transformers guy. What's his name? That everyone hates. Michael Bay. And it's actually pretty fascinating and hilarious. And she's just very funny. And she talks about modern Disney films and breaks down all the cultural stuff. It's wonderful, wonderful stuff. So that's all I have. Hopefully some of that was useful. I know I threw a lot at you. We have a few minutes now if anyone has any questions, I believe. Or if Karen, you want to take us to the next phase of this or the last phase of this.
I'd love to open up to the question. I just want to say that was such an emotionally wonderfully packed hour that I'm sort of just overwhelmed with how much information you just gave us. That flew by. I looked at the clock just now and said, oh my God. I mean, that was an amazing hour. So thank you for all of that. We have some time if people have questions. We'd love to open this up to questions. And also, Perry, if you just send me those links in an email, that way, because once we get rid of this thing, the chat, it's gone, but I can send it to anybody who wants the link to those links.
Yeah, sure.
And we did record this, so we will have this if you have friends or if you just want to see this again, because I know I do. So thanks.
Well, great. I speak quickly and I think gloss over things, so recording might be wise in this case. Magdalene, yes.
So I have a question because can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay. When I started learning camera work, I was told to kind of consider the camera to be like curious, a little bit naughty, a little bit like giving you permission to look at things you wouldn't normally look at in real life, that kind of thing. And I think of pitching in the same way, like if you're trying to bring someone across the room into your vision of a story, you kind of want to go from omniscient to close up to like little curious angles and stuff like that. I was just wondering if you have a visualization of yourself as a pitcher, as a camera, or how do you see internally yourself when you're pitching? That's
really interesting. I think the idea of being curious, I think, connects to this idea of you're not trying to play defense here. You're trying to like bring people into your world in an exciting way and talk about something you love. Visualizing, this is very interesting. Yes, I do, but it's a little silly. Which is a channel where it's not about, this sounds ridiculous, where it's not about me, but it's about me being a transistor between the idea and the people I'm talking to. And I get to just, it's so awesome that I get to talk about it. And that has helped me a little bit because I think there's so much ego, not even in a negative way when you're pitching, because it feels like you're a politician attempting to defend your existence as a creative. And instead, if you talk about it more like, you know, like what you're saying, like, okay, I just heard about this article where X, Y, and Z happened, and this connects to something that happened to me when I was younger, and I can't stop thinking about this, and here's the way I wanted to talk about it in a story. It all just feels much more natural and real rather than something sort of self-conscious. You know, and also, I mean, I think part of it has to do, what I should say is I think part of it has to do with your personality. I get super enthusiastic and into stuff, and that's part of my sort of jam. I think people have different ways of pitching, and you'll have to find one that works with you. But I think in my experience, making it personal and coming from an angle of excitement, exploration, I think that's a useful term, because, you know, you're often supposed to be like, and it could be this, and it could be this, and I thought about this, which will bring the people you're pitching to and to be like, oh my God, that reminds me of my childhood, and then you all sort of do it together a little bit. Yeah.
Great, thank you.
Sure. My students are like, I've asked you all the questions already. Sam, yes.
So I'm kind of stuck on the pitching portion of writing. So like after you're taking your writing class, I feel that I have a good sense of my writing, but I'm not sure what to do with the materials once I finish. Like, how do you even find people and then introduce yourself, take your pitches? I have a year until graduate school where I probably make those connections. So yeah, what advice would you give to somebody?
Well, there's a certain portion of this that is definitely kind of life advice, career advice, you know, stuff that only you can sort of determine, because it all depends on your goals a little bit. Whether it's to want to get into grad school or want to make something the best you can make it, or I think representation, but that's, I mean, you may be a little early for that, but I see what you're saying. I think there are a lot of writers groups out there, although it can be a little strange to sign up to like Gotham Writers Workshop and stuff sort of out of the blue. I think talking to some of your colleagues from your class or other creative writing people in school is a decent start. I found that if I say, I'm willing to read anything, is anyone up for doing the same? You can get people that can, you know, that are into that. And being willing to put in the work for others, I think is a big step there. I think, I don't know enough about the creative writing side of this, but I think there are a lot of writing competitions and writing labs that you can apply to. And I would encourage you to apply to those, not even to get into them, but because they force you to hone your pitch while you do it. So they will say, just, you know, describe, like, why did you want to become a writer? And you're like, you don't want to write that. And you're like, what, you know, describe your creative voice. And you're like, I hate this. What even is it? You know, and so, but it forces you into giving at least a first draft of some of these things. And a lot of them can be very helpful. You know, forcing you to create a synopsis for your story, again, makes you sometimes realize the flaws in it. So there are a lot of things out there, especially at the moment for television writers. and labs and things like this. So I would, and they change each year, so I'm not totally up on them, but a few of my colleagues have done ones from, I think NBC and ABC for TV. IFP used to have a really great lab. Sundance has an amazing lab. The Hamptons has a pretty good lab. I think Woodstock may still have a lab. Fantasia has a good genre lab. But there's a bunch of these things out there. And again, I would encourage you to explore and apply, even if you're not going to get in, because it'll force you to sort of hone your creative vision a little bit in the process.
Thank you.
Good question. Not easy question.
Anyone else? Well, Perry, and if you do have a question, go ahead. I know I'm supposed to pause longer than that, but
Awesome. I was going to hop in and say I thought that was awesome talk.
Yeah, it was really amazing. Really appreciate this. I know you have been amazingly willing to follow up with people as they have questions. If anybody wants to direct things to me, I'm happy to share them with Perry. And Perry, thank you in advance for sharing that link just with me in an email, because I can't seem to figure out how to save it here.
Yeah, sure.
And then I'm happy to share it with anyone. Please, all of you, continue to come to our Create Wednesday event. We love having you. If you have people you want to see, let us know that as well. And really, if everybody wants to just unmute for a second and help me give Perry a round of applause, that would be wonderful. Thank you very much.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks to my students.